When tiny indie studio Campo Santo released Firewatch in 2016, the reviews shared a rather general trend. A cute, intriguing, and overall well-presented indie game that was undone by an underwhelming climax and seemingly pointless ending. But it wasn't. The ending was perfect, and everything leading up to it was perfect, at the very least in the context of what the game wanted the player to feel. And just because the ending wasn't what players were expecting, it doesn't mean the rest of the game suffers, nor does it take away from it. Because Firewatch is a game in which individual aspects must be observed in their place in the bigger picture. And don't worry, I'm not going to use the "you just didn't get it" argument, because I didn't get it either when I first played this game. I too felt like something was missing from the ending, like I missed an important detail, until I realized that sudden whiplash of reaching the end so abruptly, thinking something was missing when in reality everything was in front of the player the whole time, was exactly what the devs wanted them to feel. That feeling of emptiness, being forced to let go of your forced paradise fantasy and return to the miserable life you ran away from, was the brutal reality the game was trying to convey. Because while other games, AAA, indie or otherwise, rely on complex mechanics, rich worlds, larger-than-life narratives and such, Firewatch boasts simplicity as its greatest strength. With its cartoony art style, simple mechanics, and relatable set of circumstances and cast of characters, the player is thrown into a small world with the promise of a big secret that reveals more about the main character, Henry, than it does about the world. In my video on Pessimism in Firewatch, I found that the twist at the end was purposefully meant to punch the player in the gut and leave them viewing Henry as a reflection of themselves. In my video on Escapism, I discussed how the characters all dealt with their problems by running away, and how it slowly tore them apart. And in my video on Responsibility, I argued that children in Firewatch represent the characters' fear of and unpreparedness to handle responsibility, leaving them in tragedy. What I originally thought was a loosely sewn together patchwork of a game, I realized was an expertly woven tapestry of pain, loss, failure, and even hope. And with simplicity at its core, Firewatch uses its unique art style, simple mechanics, and relatable characters to create an experience that becomes greater than the sum of its parts. Spoiler warning, by the way, for basically the whole game. You have been warned. AAA games may have an advantage in graphical fidelity, but nothing is quite like immersing yourself in an indie game with a distinctly beautiful art style. And that is exactly what Firewatch offers. It's cute and cartoonish, splashed with a myriad of warm colors that simply ooze positive emotions. Calm, serenity, dare I say, happiness. It's like a dream, right in Henry's backyard. And that's exactly the paradox the developers want the player to find themselves in, living in a fantasy world that still exists within our own, and therefore is plagued by the same problems. The game's art style fools the player into thinking they've successfully escaped from their problems, that all the misfortune Henry went through will suddenly disappear because they've stepped into this paradise with him. Well, they haven't. There's no magical wardrobe that transports you to Narnia, or a big hairy man telling you you're a wizard. It's just a 5-hour drive from Henry's hometown of Boulder, Colorado to the Shoshone National Forest. His problems are still real, and they're just waiting to reintroduce themselves back into his life. In this forced paradise, however, his problems manifest themselves in a different form. They are no longer tragic and depressing, but now mysterious and sinister, enticing him to plunge himself further, similar to the alcoholism he developed after his wife was diagnosed with dementia. Once strange things start happening to Henry in quick succession, the player is easily coaxed into chalking it up to some government conspiracy, which is only helped by the cute and cartoonish art style that makes this break in the game's mood more jarring. It shocks the player out of their perceived safety and happiness in this forest, and suggests that they may now need to constantly look over their shoulder instead. In tandem with the art style, the simplicity of Firewatch's mechanics subconsciously signal to the player to expect a simple story to match, and while things seem to get quite out of hand, it's the characters that make for a complex and relatable set of circumstances. Henry, for instance, is a man whose life slowly falls apart after his wife is diagnosed with dementia, and who then turns to different forms of escapism in the hopes that somehow it will all go away, but in doing so forsakes a woman he committed himself to. Indie games like Firewatch, which most know as walking simulators, often need to rely on either the connection between the player and character or the world and story itself to drive the narrative forward. Firewatch does this to such an immensely engrossing degree that the player unknowingly is Henry. If you want my full analysis on this aspect of the game, you can check out my Firewatch and Pessimism video where I explore this idea in more depth. This connection is further deepened by Henry simply being a regular bloke. Sure, it's fun to lose oneself playing as a monster hunter, or a literal god, or even just farming in a 2D pixely world. But there is a sense of relatability, and even comfort, in controlling a character that has no special powers, superhuman athleticism, or performs any heroics. Just a regular person with regular people problems walking through a forest. Not only does this deepen the player's connection with Henry, but the lack of game mechanics as a result of his, well, regularness, makes them feel small and powerless in this huge expanse of forest. And this is when the mechanics, or lack thereof, start to work in favor of the story, as the player's feeling of powerlessness drives their fear and anxiety when they start to discover that there may be something more sinister at work. As soon as the game starts, it gives the player feelings of happiness and contentment, only to just as quickly take them away. The introduction has the player choose how to drunkenly approach a girl at a bar, how to develop a relationship with her, and eventually, all the mundanities of a steady, happy marriage. And then, they're forced to deal with her dementia. There's no way to prevent it, there's no reloading of a previous save, and trust me, that's one of my prolific skills in gaming, so I have tried. The player is simply forced to endure it. And just like every real-life tragedy, there are no right answers. This is the first instance of the game presenting the player with a certain context, in this case the illusion of happiness, only to later reveal the misfortune laying in wait. Similar to the introduction, the game feeds perspectives that, unbeknownst to them, forces the player to think in a specific type of way. During Henry's first evening as a fire lookout, he encounters a figure as he's hiking, which the game labels as a creepy guy. The player has no idea who this guy is, yet the game forces them to recognize him as creepy. However, once they report it, Henry's supervisor, Delilah, offers a perfectly reasonable rationale and even pokes fun at him for assuming anything other than a perfectly normal set of circumstances. Thus, the game uses these forced perspectives to bring attention to our natural inclination to overthink perfectly normal situations, and Delilah serves as the overlooked but obvious rational explanation. However, her credibility is quickly put into question the following morning, when she accidentally leaves her radio on while having a suspicious conversation with someone else. If the player chooses to eavesdrop on her, they are also choosing to give in and return to their suspicion that something is not quite right about this job. Delilah's conversation gives just enough information, but absent specifics, further stimulating suspicion and, again, providing the player with misleading contexts that embed delusions in their mind. Thus, the game mirrors how we tend to let our imagination run amok when we are put on edge, and as a result, it distorts how the player views the world, the characters, and the narrative from the first. Despite Firewatch's rather straightforward, albeit mysterious, narrative, the game is laced with flawed characters and relatable circumstances that exacerbate their problems. The game's beginning already gives cause for the player to sympathize with Henry and his predicament and, as aforementioned, to develop a connection with him. The player may even find themselves rooting for Henry, but towards goals that shift just as suddenly as Henry's world does. In the first half of the game, the player wants Henry to simply find comfort and happiness after experiencing such hardships. But as he starts to piece together his self-constructed conspiracy, the player forgets all about the problems he has yet to face back in Colorado and is now solely concerned with unraveling the mystery. This ordeal offers a distraction from Henry's past miseries, and this game, which sucks the player in further and further the more the stakes seem to be raised, becomes distraction from the mundanities of their life. Delilah is a character that sticks by Henry throughout the entire game, especially in the instances of his conspiracy-driven hysterics, and at times even fuels it herself. And whether they realize it or not, the player ends up developing a connection with nothing but a voice, Delilah's voice. Because despite her role in the story and in Henry's escapism, the player never actually sees her. They have only her charming personality, charismatic banter, and voice to intrigue them. Her words accompany the player the whole game, yet they are never given the opportunity to even reaffirm the idea that they're not alone in this forest by seeing her. Although it is expected that fire lookouts lack physical contact with other humans for significant periods of time, Delilah's physical absence is more significant for the player's relationship with her. Okay, slight conspiracy theory time. What if the Delilah the player constantly hears on the radio isn't actually the true Delilah existing in the game world? What if the actual Delilah is a completely uninteresting and boring lookout supervisor, while Henry is projecting his desire for the youthful, fun, and healthy woman his wife once was on her? What if the constant banter between them is all in Henry's head, or conversations he's having with himself, such as the time Delilah overheard him talking in his sleep about his wife? Was it real when Delilah told Henry she speaks to him more frequently than the other lookouts? It would also give reason as to why Delilah suddenly didn't feel the need to support her ex-boyfriend when he needed her, because maybe Henry made up the whole story in his head to reassure himself that he's not the sole target of misfortune in the world. It's a huge stretch, and I don't expect any of this to be true or have any merit at all, but it does provide a different perspective on their relationship that many may not have considered. An important thing to note is that Delilah isn't the only character that is physically absent, but every character in the game the player never sees. Julia, Delilah, Ned, Brian, and to an extent, Henry. This is important for 3 reasons. 1, it allows the player's imagination to run freely, further exacerbating the bad moments and emphasizing the good. 2, not seeing anyone's faces deepens the feeling of isolation. And 3, to drive home the point that although we never physically see any of these characters, we can all relate to the pain their problems cause them. In my Firewatch and Pessimism video, I argued that Firewatch is a game about people simply trying to get through their problems, and I do believe this to be the overarching theme of the whole game, then accompanied by the ensemble of other themes present. We never see any of the characters, yet we still become attached, connected, and feel sympathy for them. I cannot begin to understate how relevant this point is in a digital age where we read or watch on the news every day horrible things happening to people, to families, to children, all around the world. Yet we still feel for them. We don't see these people's pain or suffering, but we know it, and it can come in every form imaginable, no matter who you are or where you come from. And yes, some people's tragedies are so uniquely torturous, like Henry's, that it's hard for a regular person to fully understand. But that doesn't stop us from trying to sympathize with them. The message Firewatch is trying to send is that you don't have to see a person to understand their pain, because it is all around us. It's so omnipresent that it's almost the way of the world now. But that shouldn't be a daunting sentiment. If anything, it should be comforting, knowing that, although it may feel like it at times, no one is or ever will be alone in their pain. Firewatch is a game that doesn't hold anything back, and does not pull any punches. It uses everything in its arsenal to elicit feelings of emptiness, sadness, and grief from the player, while still taking them on an exciting yet short journey. However, the player must have distance from these aspects in order to see them work as a whole. The cartoonish and warm art style works with the game's forced perspectives to let the player's guard down, only to frighten them into putting it back up. The lack of complex game mechanics gives way for the relatable characters and circumstances that the player can really feel like they are accompanying. Firewatch isn't the type of artistic piece that is meant to be scoured for every tiny little detail, but instead is meant to be appreciated as a whole. It's a mosaic that the player must take a step back from to see that its seemingly fractured form serves to create a unified piece such that every tile, every aspect, contributes to the whole. A mosaic that is a reflection of our ugly, ugly world. And no, I don't mean the whole world, although it can seem like it at times. I mean our own worlds. Our ugly, flawed, individual worlds that we create for ourselves and live in. It's easy to get caught up in all the bullshit happening around us, but what Firewatch aims to teach is that whether we try to hope for better things, or run away, or ignore responsibilities, our lives are in our own hands. How we deal with the problems life gives us is up to us, because our life is something we can control. It's something we can make better. We just have to be willing to try. Please excuse the bagel. It's nearly midnight, and I've got the midnight munchies, so I made myself a bagel with peanut butter and strawberry jam. But anyway, thank you so much for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. This video took a lot longer than I thought to make. I realized I wanted to spend more time in the editing process and make sure that it was very heavily edited to keep it entertaining and make it flow well, just so that it's a good video. You know, I looked back at my previous video essays and I realized they were a bit stale, they were a bit bland. I couldn't really put my finger on what it was, and I realized it was the post-production process. So that's why this video took a lot longer. I wanted to spend a lot more time with it. Also the writing process, because I treated this as the culmination of kind of several themes and ideas and what really makes this game Firewatch so great and why I love it so much. That's why I spent a lot of time writing it. I know I haven't made a video essay in a long time, so I hope this was worth the wait. And if you liked it, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you have something useful to say or otherwise, please do so in the comments down below. Thank you so much to my patrons on Patreon. I love you guys so much. I really appreciate the donations and all the support that you give me. And finally, if you want to support me, subscribe and see more content like this. Other than that, I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.